The Ahom kingdom, vast and powerful, thrived on the banks of the Brahmaputra, its influence stretching deep into the hills and forests that surrounded it. The dynasty, forged by warrior kings who crossed rivers and mountains to carve a place in history, was known not only for its military might but also for its ability to assimilate, to turn enemies into allies and strangers into kin. Yet there were boundaries even the Ahoms hesitated to cross, lands where the forests breathed secrets and the people who lived among them had no use for kings. To the north, where the mist rolled over the highlands, lived the Konyaks. Known as fierce warriors and keepers of traditions older than time, they neither bowed to an empire nor sought its riches. They ruled themselves, their society bound by oaths of honor and the wisdom of their angs, kings who did not wear crowns of gold but bore the scars of battles past. Among them was a princess, Saram, the daughter of an Ang whose lineage was spoken of in hushed reverence. She had grown up among warriors, her hands accustomed to the weight of a blade, her spirit as untamed as the land itself. Across the plains, in the court of Gargan, there was a king whose name was spoken with both admiration and fear. Sukumar, a ruler in his prime, one who understood that power lay not just in conquest but in alliances. He had seen kingdoms fall not to the strength of an enemy's sword, but to the weakness of division. His court was one of opulence, filled with scholars and generals, where the scent of burning incense mingled with the sharp tang of strategy. Yet even in such a place, whispers carried news of the Konyaks, their resistance, their warriors, their refusal to bend. It was during one of the many skirmishes along the borders of the Ahom kingdom that fate wove its threads tighter. A failed negotiation had led to bloodshed, and the Konyaks, fierce in their reprisal, struck at Ahom outposts with a precision that unsettled the king's advisors. Sukumar knew that a prolonged conflict would cost him not just men but time, something no ruler could afford to waste. So he did what no Ahom king before him had done. He sought to understand his enemy, not through spies or warriors but with his own eyes. Disguised as a common envoy, he rode north, his presence concealed beneath a simple tunic, his only protection the handful of trusted guards who accompanied him. The forests of the Konyaks were unlike anything he had seen, dense, ancient, filled with a silence that spoke of unseen eyes. The air was thick with the scent of earth and wood smoke, and each step felt like an intrusion into a world untouched by time. It was here, in the heart of this forbidden land, that he first saw Saram. She was nothing like the queens and noble women of his court. There was no delicate submission in her stance, no carefully measured words meant to flatter or deceive. She stood among her people, tall and unyielding, her gaze sharp as a hunter's blade. When she spoke, it was with the authority of one who had never needed permission to exist. She did not ask why an Ahom king walked her lands. She only wanted to know whether he had come as a friend or an enemy. Sukumar had faced many warriors, had stood on battlefields where steel met flesh, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet strength in her voice. It was not the defiance of a soldier, it was the certainty of someone who belonged to the land itself, someone who could not be conquered. In the days that followed, the two walked the forest together, their conversations shifting from politics to myths, from war to the weight of duty. She spoke of her ancestors, of spirits that guarded the rivers and trees, of a time before kings and empires. He told her of his people, of battles fought not for glory but for survival, of the loneliness that came with ruling a kingdom that demanded everything of him. And yet, even as an understanding formed between them, they both knew that their worlds were bound by chains heavier than they could break. He was a king whose duty was to his people. She was a daughter of the hills, heir to a legacy that did not bow to crowns. There could be no union between them without betrayal, either of their blood or their honor. But fate is rarely kind to those who defy it. The peace that had settled between their people was fragile, held together by whispered words and unspoken promises. There were those on both sides who saw danger in their bond, advisors who spoke of weakness, warriors who saw dishonor. Rumors began to spread, twisting truth into something dangerous. And in a world where power was everything, love was a vulnerability neither could afford. As the days passed, the forest that once felt alive with possibility became heavy with the weight of an impending storm. Decisions would have to be made, sacrifices weighed. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether the bond between an Ahom king and a Konyak princess would end in unity, or in blood. The river coiled through the valley like a silver serpent, its waters whispering secrets to those who dared listen. The village elders spoke of a time when the river ran red with the desires of kings and the blood of warriors, when love and betrayal wove a story that would never be forgotten. Among the many legends of the land, none was as haunting as the tale of Naginimora, the story of an Ahom king and a Konyak princess, bound by fate, torn by duty. Sukumar had returned to his kingdom, but the forests of the Konyaks had left their mark on him. The scent of earth and burning wood lingered in his thoughts, and in the quiet hours of the night, he found himself thinking of Sarum, not as a rival's daughter, not as an obstacle in his path, but as something far more dangerous. She was a possibility, an impossible dream in a life where every decision had been made for him long before he had drawn his first breath. He had seen the way his advisors exchanged wary glances, how his generals spoke of the Konyaks as if they were nothing more than a problem to be solved. The peace he had brokered was fragile, resting on unspoken truths and delicate balances. To them, the Konyaks were useful only insofar as they did not become a threat. But he had walked their lands. He had seen their warriors, their customs, their pride. He knew they would never bend to Ahom rule, not through war, not through treaties. It was during one of those sleepless nights that the message came. A lone warrior, his face streaked with the soot of long travel, stood before the court, his breath ragged, his hands trembling from more than just exhaustion. He carried a warning: Sarum had been taken. The words sent a ripple through the hall, hushed whispers rising like the tide. It was not an Ahom hand that had stolen her away, but one of her own. Her father, the Ang of the Konyaks, had learned of her meetings with Sukumar. To him it was not just a betrayal of blood, it was an unraveling of everything their people had stood for. The daughter of a Konyak king could not love an Ahom ruler. She could not walk the path of a people who had been both enemy and stranger. Sukumar knew what this meant. To the Konyaks, honor was more than a word, it was the foundation upon which their world stood. Sarum would not simply be punished. She would be erased, her existence swallowed by the very earth she had once called home. He did not hesitate. Before the council could speak of strategy, before his generals could weigh the consequences, he rode for the hills. The journey was unforgiving, the forest darker than he remembered, the wind heavy with the scent of rain. His men followed, but they knew this was not a battle they could fight with swords. It was a war of hearts, and in such wars there were rarely victors. Sarum had been taken to the sacred caves of her ancestors, a place where judgment was passed, where the spirits of the past watched as the living made their choices. She stood in the center of the cavern, her wrists bound in ceremonial cloth, her gaze steady as the elders spoke. They told her of duty, of the blood that ran through her veins, of the weight of her betrayal. But she did not bow her head. She did not beg. And then the ground trembled. The Konyaks turned as a figure emerged from the mouth of the cave, his cloak heavy with rain, his eyes dark with something more dangerous than fury, determination. Sukumar stepped forward, past the warriors who reached for their weapons, past the elders whose voices rose in protest. His gaze locked onto hers, and in that moment, there was no kingdom, no war, no history, only the unspoken truth that had always existed between them. He spoke not to the elders, not to the warriors, but to her father, the man who held her fate in his hands. He did not ask for mercy, nor did he plead. He simply told the truth, that he had come for her, that he would not leave without her, that no kingdom, no war, no history could dictate what lay in their hearts. Silence stretched through the cavern, heavy as stone. The Ang's face remained unreadable, his thoughts a storm behind his eyes. And then he moved, not to strike, not to command, but to step aside. The decision was not a surrender, nor was it an acceptance. It was something far more complicated, something that neither the Ahoms nor the Konyaks would ever fully understand. But fate is not kind to those who defy it. As they left the cavern, the earth beneath them shifted. The elders would later speak of spirits displeased, of ancestors who did not look kindly upon those who broke tradition. The river that had once been calm now raged, its waters rising as if in protest. The storm that had threatened the horizon descended upon them with a vengeance, and the path they had taken was now lost beneath waves that had never touched this land before. Sarum turned to him, her fingers tightening around his. And then before the world could stop them they ran. The legends say they were never seen again. Some believe they were swallowed by the river, their souls bound to its depths, forever entwined. Others whisper of a village deep in the forests, hidden from the eyes of kings and conquerors, where an Ahom king and a Konyak princess lived not as rulers, but as something far more rare, free. And so, the place where the river bends, where the hills meet the sky, came to be known as Naginimora, the land where the serpent sleeps, where love defied kings and destiny alike. The village storyteller sat cross-legged on the raised wooden platform, his voice carrying through the cool night air. The flickering glow of the fire cast shadows on the faces of those who gathered to listen, elders with memories stretching beyond lifetimes, children with wide eyes absorbing every whispered word, and travelers who had come seeking more than just stories. Naginimora was no longer just a place. It was a legend that pulsed through the veins of the land, shaping the way people spoke of love, destiny, and sacrifice. Time had turned Sukumar and Saram into figures of myth, their story woven into the fabric of the Konyak and Ahom traditions. Some believed their spirits still roamed the forests, whispering in the rustling leaves, watching over the river that had once tried to claim them. Others said the serpent that slept beneath the land stirred only when lovers tested the boundaries of fate, when hearts dared to choose a path that others deemed forbidden. The narrative had changed with each passing generation. In some versions, Saram had never been taken by her father but had chosen to leave her people, walking willingly into the Ahom court where she was never fully accepted. In others, Sukumar had not come alone but had waged a silent war, his love for her tested by the blood he was forced to spill. There were even those who claimed they had never escaped at all, that their bodies had become one with the river, transformed by the spirits into eternal guardians of the land. But beyond the myths and embellishments, something deeper remained, a truth that could not be erased. Their love had challenged the very foundations of power, had shaken the beliefs that had governed two great peoples for centuries. And though history had left no monuments to their names, the echoes of their defiance still rippled through time. In the markets of Assam, merchants still told their children to listen for the cries of the river, for it was said to weep for the lovers lost to its depths. In the hills of Nagaland, warriors carved serpentine patterns into their weapons, a silent homage to the battle that had never been fought, to the victory that had been won not with steel but with unwavering hearts. Even now, when an Ahom and a Konyak chose to be together, there were whispers, cautionary tales, words of warning, and yet, a hint of admiration. The young girl sitting closest to the fire raised her hand, her voice steady despite the weight of her question. "Do you believe they were real?" The storyteller smiled, his eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "Does it matter?" The villagers exchanged glances, some nodding in quiet agreement, others still holding on to their skepticism. But whether Sukumar and Saram had walked these lands as flesh and blood, or only as spirits of legend, the effect of their story was undeniable. It had shaped the way people understood love, not as something bound by bloodlines and duty, but as a force capable of bending even the will of the gods. Far beyond the village, where city lights dimmed the stars and the past was often buried beneath concrete and ambition, the story still found a way to endure. Scholars wrote about it, tracing its origins through forgotten manuscripts and oral traditions. Poets turned their tragedy into verses that lovers whispered beneath moonlit skies. Filmmakers and playwrights reimagined their journey, changing details to fit new generations yet never altering the core of what it meant. There was power in a story that refused to die. It reminded people that the greatest battles were not always fought with swords, that defiance could take the shape of a hand reaching for another, even when the world demanded it let go. The storyteller stood, brushing the dust from his robe, signaling that the night's tale had come to an end. But as the villagers drifted back to their homes, as the fire slowly burned to embers, one thing remained certain: Naginimora was more than a legend. It was a testament to those who dared to challenge fate, to those who believed that love, in all its defiant beauty, could stand against the tide of time.